Welcome to the sixth in a series of noon lectures sponsored by the Associated Student Speakers Program. It is a distinct honor to have as our guest today the Honorable Tran Van Dihn. In 1960, Mr. Van Dihn became a cabinet officer in the Vietnamese government, holding the position of Director General of Information to the Republic of Vietnam. In 1961, he joined the Vietnamese mission in the United Nations, and later that year was named consular in his nation's embassy in Washington. Mr. Van Dihn has also served as ambassador of Vietnam to the United States and is currently the Washington bureau chief for the Saigon Post in South Vietnam. Also like to mention at this time, after Mr. Van Dihn's presentation, there will be a very brief intermission, and then after that time I wish everyone would come forward and we will have an informal question and answer period. It now gives me great pleasure to introduce to you the Honorable Tran Van Dihn.
Thank you very much. I'm very sure that during the question and answer period you are going to ask me about the war in Vietnam. But according to my contract with your university, I'm supposed to speak about the U.S. role in Vietnam, past and future, no present. But I think it's very interesting. I don't know, I just asked this because of accident you picked that title or by deliberation, I don't know, or because you have a good professor here. Nevertheless, I think in order to understand what we are going to do in the next few days in Vietnam, which means very much what we are going to do in the present time, it's very interesting to look at the past relation between Vietnam and the United States. According to some Vietnamese historian, and don't get frightened, I'm not going to give you a long lecture about what happened in the last 100 years. According to some Vietnamese historian, the first American diplomat ever come to Vietnam was a man named Mr. Brown. He was in Vietnam in 1881. And it's very significant because he was in Vietnam at the time when Vietnam was divided exactly at the same parallels. This is the first coincidence. So in 1881, Mr. Brown went to Hue, where was the center of the South lived. It's more or less like a kingdom, but at that time the North became the territory of the Trinh, and the South became the territory of the Nguyen. But when he was there, the country was still divided and it's united only in 1802. The South became the territory of the Nguyen. But when he was there, the country was still divided and it's united only in 1802. So when he was there, he stayed at a place called the Thương Bạc place, which means the place for deliberation. And he waited for the king to see him. But the king has so much trouble with, I think, personal problem. According to Vietnamese history, he has problems with concubine and things like that. But that is irrelevant. So he could not see him. So Mr. Brown left Vietnam without any diplomatic relations being engaged between Vietnam and the United States. Since then, as you know, in 1884, Vietnam became a colony of France, and therefore the relation between the United States and Vietnam ceased to exist until 1918, and it's another very strange coincidence. In 1918, lived in Paris a Vietnamese in his 30s, and his name was Nguyen Ai Quoc, and he was a political activist. He was very active in the French Socialist Party, and in 1918, that man wanted to meet President Woodrow Wilson at the Versailles Conference. And he borrowed a tuxedo. He was full of ideas. But again, President Wilson was too busy for some reason and could not see him. That man is now the president of North Vietnam, Mr. Ho Chi Minh. And then from 1918 until 1940, there's practically no relation between the United States and Vietnam because of the fact that Vietnam was a colony of France. But during that period, there are some attempts of Vietnamese to get into America, some very private influence, and according to our statistic at that time, we have probably 25 or 26 having visited the United States of America. But then in 1943, another interesting incident happened. In 1940, as you know, the Japanese began to enter Vietnam as a part of their war against the United States and the Allies. And the French simply let them come because the French was defeated in Germany, by the Germans in France, and therefore could not protect Vietnam against the Japanese invaders. So in 1940, in China, there was the formation of the party called briefly the Viet Minh Party. And again, the head of the party was Mr. Ho Chi Minh, who is now the president of North Vietnam. And in 1943, Mr. Ho Chi Minh was arrested by the Chinese nationalists, by General Tran Van Dihn in Quang Tung. And who bailed him out? The Americans, the Office of Strategic Service, the OSS. So he was bailed out, and they let him go back to Vietnam. Actually, he did not go back in Vietnam until 1945. But one of his deputies, who is now the commander-in-chief of North Vietnamese Army, also the Minister of Defense of North Vietnamese Army, General Vo Nguyen Giáp, was a professor of history at the University of Hanoi and the College of Thăng Long in 1940 and 41. And he left the country and go to China, and in 1943, on the order of the President of North Vietnam today, he came back to Vietnam. And he came back to Vietnam with one American. I have a very big difficulty to find out his real name, but in some documents available at that time, his name is Major Thomas. And he has written a letter to Vo Nguyen Giáp, who was known at that time as Comrade Vang. And that is why another relation between an American secret service, more or less, and the nucleus of the Vietnamese Liberation Army. So in 1945, as you know, the Japanese was defeated. And there was an American mission which has been parachuted into Hanoi exactly in August 26, 1945. And the man who led the mission is one general by the name of Gallagher. I don't know where he is now. Again, it might be a nickname or maybe not his proper real name. So there was at that time a great enthusiasm among the Vietnamese vis-a-vis the Americans. And there was an association called the Vietnam American Friendship Association, which was organized in Hanoi in about September 1945. And that same organization has a branch in New York in the same year. It has been dissolved in 1948 in New York. And the leader of that outfit is now the deputy chairman of the Viet Cong in South Vietnam. You see, there's fantastic coincidence between the history between our two countries. And as you know, since 1945, because mostly of the American interest in Europe and other things, and because of the pressure of France and the nationalist Chinese, the U.S. begin to retreat from the Vietnamese front, more or less. So I think the U.S. military mission in Hanoi and the American Vietnamese Friendship Association was dissolved in December 1946 when we fought against the French. So during the war against the French, the relation continued to be tense in many ways, because in one way, I don't think that the U.S. administration at that time really want to support the French. But you have the problem of NATO, and therefore, in 1950, the policy of this country was to support the French, with one condition, that the French give quoted independence to the associate state of Indochina, it means Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. And as you know, the French did not give the kind of independence the Vietnamese wanted at that time. And therefore, when the French was defeated in 1954 at Dien Bien Phu, the American role was practically associated by many Vietnamese as a part of the French role in the whole picture in Vietnam. And as you know, at the Geneva Agreement in 1954, the attitude of the U.S. delegation was to be there but not to be committed. The U.S. did not sign the Geneva Agreement, but support the final declaration of the Geneva Agreements. But during that period, somewhere in New Jersey lived another man by the name of Ngo Dinh Diem. And by 1950, I should say 53, he began to have some contacts with some Americans. And in 1954, the same man came back to Vietnam first as a Prime Minister of South Vietnam and later the President of South Vietnam. And as you know, he was overthrown and killed in November 1963. During this period of relation between the U.S. and Vietnam, I found some very strange elements. It has been admitted in many circles that at that time Vietnam was puppet of the United States, but I have never seen two countries with so much disagreement, especially on the field of foreign affairs. And here another interesting coincidence. In 1955, you know, the situation in Vietnam was very bad. And behind the scene, there was a man who operated very cleverly, and I must say with a lot of goodwill and dedication. His name is, at that time, was Conan Lansdale. You may read about him in the early American called Conan Lansdale. And now he's a Major General, retired, and again in Vietnam. So you see, there's a lot of repetition of things. So in 1956, South Vietnam refused elections. But at that time, CETO was formed, and Vietnam was not a member of CETO, but under the umbrella, the protection of CETO. So therefore, I think the foreign policy of South Vietnam at that time was to contain North Vietnam and practically delay the elections until today. So during that period, the relation between the United States of America and the South Vietnamese government was, to say the least, very tense because of the different concept in politics. Of course, I think in some minor things, the United States could exercise a great deal of influence, but not on the major affairs. I give you an experience. The first divorce, actually, between the United States and South Vietnam, now I forgot about North Vietnam because by now there's practically no relation between North Vietnam and the United States. So in 1962, as you know, the United States in Geneva signed agreement for neutrality in Laos, or neutralization of Laos. And President Diem in South Vietnam objected to it and withdraw our ambassador from Laos. And I have seen exactly 15 cables between the United States government and Vietnam to force almost the Vietnamese government to change attitude. But we did not change at that time, and this was the first break on the policy level between the United States of America and South Vietnam on foreign policy. The final break was due to a woman. One is, as you know, Madame Ngo Dinh Nhu was here in 1963. And this was fantastic because I was at the time in charge of the embassy, and I know how powerless the United States at that time. Because we all know that if that rather beautiful woman came to this country with on her disastrous statement and misbehavior, probably the situation which already has been tense in Vietnam could be even worse. So there are many discussions between the Vietnamese government and the U.S. government, especially between myself and some high-ranking official at the State Department, how to prevent her from coming in. But as you know, we failed. Who could prevent a woman like that to sneak in into this country anyway? So by 1963, as you know, the President Diem was overthrown. And since then, we have a lot of upheavals. As you know, many generals come and many generals go. And the relation between the United States of America remain more or less on the same basis, like during President Diem's time, until February 1965. Why I picked February 1965 as a very important date? Because in 1965, the United States changed its, I must say, strategy of war in Vietnam. In February 1965, we bombed North Vietnam, and we carried more bombing in South Vietnam. This means that the whole picture of the war began to change, and therefore the the role of the United States in Vietnam changed, in my opinion, very radically. And as you know by now, the United States maintained 140,000 troops in Vietnam, and the Vietnamese government is still headed by a general. How long he'll be there, I can't guarantee. So the problem today, we face today, is not so much now to disagree or agree with the U.S. policy in Vietnam, but what could we do from here? It means from the point when the U.S. have changed the concept of war in Vietnam from a kind of guerrilla warfare into a kind of global confrontation, more or less. It means that we have escalated the war. How to de-escalate it, or how to escalate it more if somebody of you like to escalate it more? I don't believe so, but I think there are some people who like it. So what I am looking in the next few months or in the future of our relation between the United States depend very much on these two things. What will be the outcome of the war in Vietnam? This kind of outcome may be first a negotiation. Negotiation means that we are going to bring all the party concerned in the war in Vietnam into a table conference and work out some kind of agreement based on probably in the 1954 Geneva agreements. Or, like many other cases in the history, the guerrilla or the Viet Cong just begin to fade away little bit in 5 years, 4 years, and there's no question of either negotiation or anything at all, because this is one of the things the Viet Cong might be able to do if just to wait for another 10 years and then go back again. If we have negotiation in Vietnam, and then the relation between the United States and Vietnam depends very much on one conditions, where we stand on the problem of unification of Vietnam. As you know now, the position of the United States is, I'm not very sure actually of what is the position of the United States on this problem of unification. I should say so, because I have the impression, according to President Johnson's speech at Baltimore, that we stand for an independent South Vietnam. It means that we stand for a separate South Vietnam. I don't know if there's any spokesman for the White House here, but if it's not true, and then I think we run into a lot of troubles. Because the problem of unification in Vietnam, if you base it on the historical factor, it has many difficulties. Because as you know, our country has been divided once for 165 years or 65 years. And then because of the march of the Vietnamese from the north to the south, the unification of the country is really difficult. But because exactly of that, the Vietnamese are very emotional about this unification problem. This is a very strange reaction, but in Vietnam, no politician, I believe, could stand against the unification of the country. So if we negotiate and stand on the unification of Vietnam, I think the details will be significant. It may be through elections, partial election, and then general election, I don't know, but these are all details. And if we stand for that, and then probably we have a kind of relaxed relation in which a united Vietnam would have a really good relation with the United States. I don't think that at that time Vietnam would be a pro-American state or something like that. But at least it's not a strained relation, because then the Vietnamese will have more confidence in their destiny. It's unified country and no more war and things like that. So they could work out some kind of more decent relation between the United States and Vietnam. But if the war just fade away, which is also possible, you see, because if we send 2 helicopters and 1 jet plane after every Viet Cong, we might be able to succeed, you see. I think so, because the Viet Cong may retreat somewhere in the jungle and 10 years later they come back and we have to do it again. So if it's not happen, and there probably a kind of a consolidation of the American position in South Vietnam, the way you saw probably in Vietnam in 1960 or 61, which was the year when we really begin to build up strongly the South Vietnamese army. So this is, in my opinion, we have looked into the problem of the past, We have looking in the problem of the futures. And if my English is good enough, and then we should accept one fact, that the United States power is there. What could we do about it? First, as a Vietnamese, I have least alternative to ask Americans to get out. But then how? Because this is very difficult, because to ask Americans to get out is very easy, but how? Through which channels? And how the United States of America really do it in practice. So I cannot think of any practical way to do that. And then to ask Americans to stay with more commitment, it means to many Vietnamese to defeat our own purpose. To fight this war, it means that it may gradually, no matter how, when we have the American troops will be in Vietnam, it may decrease our independence, it may stand in the way of our unity, and probably it's very difficult for a country with the foreign troops to carry the problem of social justice, which is actually the base of the Vietnamese problem. So the third alternative is, in my opinion, how to convert this American military commitment, which is already there. No matter you like it or not, it's there. It's very impressive, very efficient, and very scientific. How to convert it into something less military and more human. And this is why some Americans, including General Lansdale, who is now in Vietnam, is trying to do just that. How we could do that in the climate of war, I don't know. So this is what I propose. One is very easy to criticize, and that is why you see, when you say criticize, many people said that you have no brain, or you have not sane. So I propose this, and I have this just on my way from Fresno to Los Angeles. I have no meditation about this problem, but I trust that you are familiar with the Vietnamese problem. So I propose this. I propose from now on, we negotiate a treaty between the United States of America and South Vietnam first. This treaty will define the role of the Americans in Vietnam, the number of troops, and how long. For example, if we have a treaty saying that the number during the emergency, and then we have to define what we call by emergency and things like that, which I think is the job of the lawyers and diplomats. We define, for example, and this is just in theory, we define the role of the United States in Vietnam as during the emergency to stay there for not more than 3 years. And during each year, the United States will withdraw by 1/3 and replaced by the South Vietnamese troops, or things like that. Second, in some area which is already secure, we relieve the American military men by volunteer like a Peace Corps or some organization like that, and gradually, probably, in my opinion, humanize the whole commitment of the United States of America in Vietnam. This humanization have, in my opinion, two advantages. One is to relieve some worry from the Vietnamese, because you see, it's very easy for us to say that when the Vietnamese have to trust an American, we have shown to the whole world how good we have been in the Philippines and other countries. But the trouble is this. The Vietnamese has been told the same thing by everyone who came to Vietnam, including the French, the Japanese, the Chinese. So I guess that except some few Vietnamese people, there is serious doubt in many Vietnamese, and I'm very frank to admit that. To ask the Vietnamese peasant now to accept totally an American advisor as his liberator is to ask too much. We have to prove in a different way that he's really what he is. It means that he cares about the Vietnamese family, about his garden and his chicken and all this kind of things which is happen in the village level. So I think probably this kind of, and probably with this kind of treaty, you don't need to burn your draft card, because then you can say to the administration that I disagree with the war, but I agree that we must help the Vietnamese people. And we go en masse, not only 1,000 U.S. students, American students, but probably 100,000 students. And then what the Viet Cong will do? They probably look at you and think that, well, after all, you are a nice kid. Because then you can defeat them there, you see, because really but again, you see, it's thrown to discussion. Some may object to this kind of proposals in between a missionary and a Vietnamese. But Without this kind of outlet, the problem is how to solve the problem in Vietnam. Negotiation, de-escalation, escalation, we have practically no alternative except to continue this kind of policy. And I have another suggestion, which is out of my observation of the situation in your country. I have been known, actually, probably that is why you invite me to come here to lecture. I have been known as an opponent of the U.S. policy in Vietnam. It's very well known. It's not a very good reputation, but I was known like that. But now you look at the reality of the situation in your country. Only yesterday, that because I said something like, well, we must support President Johnson because otherwise the extreme right will take over and we are all in a bad shape. And I almost accused as a communist already. So to oppose President Johnson's policy today without alternative left to him in order for him to overcome the pressure from the, I must say, the hawks, it's very difficult. Because then what could we do? Because you see the extreme elements in any country or in any political party just wait for this kind of situation. That's why I believe that we have, you and me, have now to, and I want to repeat President Johnson, reason together and find out really what in practice we could do in Vietnam today, what kind of solution we could offer in order to come out to some kind of reasonable argument and reasonable agreement. Well, I don't know, but I hope that in the next few seconds when we start the discussion and answer periods, you make me less confused. And now, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. So now, who has the first question?
Are there any questions? All those who have questions, just raise their hand.
Yes, please. Yes, because at that time we did not have 140,000 American troops with about 400 sorties a month. And you really, at that time, that is why I said the situation now is completely different. And I was home about a week during the last 2 months. And I have to accept, I said defeated militarily. This is very important word, you see, because even now, even the commander of American Legion said that we may win everything in Vietnam, but we may lose everything in Vietnam. So what I said at that time is still true. Because if we look at the problem in the political angle and also other angles, and then we have now probably how to, this is actually what I try to say, how to humanize this military commitment. But now military speaking, for example, you look at the recent battle in Plaimé, in one area in the mountains. Normally that battle could be lost and must be lost. But how it could be lost now? Frankly, now the Viet Cong is still there, but we just dump in more bombs and more planes. And it's impossible. Military speaking, I think we have to be realistic about that, and I think the Viet Cong know about that too, that militarily today is impossible. You see the Front of Liberation, I want to call this by the Front of Liberation so we could have a more unbiased discussion. The Front of Liberation plan actually during the summer is not a kind of monsoon offensive like people in this country said, but actually to create a larger liberated zone in order to initiate negotiation or to capture more countryside and even more city. So that plan was really being defeated militarily again, you see, by the U.S. might. And this, you have to go in Vietnam and see it. It's impossible. I don't know how, frankly, we could lose this war militarily. Because now you have things like a lot of gadgets, how to detect the guerrilla in the tunnels, and oh, fantastic. And this is American know-how. You are the product of that, and you should know about that. It's impossible. So I don't know what we do. I'm very glad that you remember me during my younger days when I make a statement at St. Joseph. Yes. I think the question is the war in Vietnam a civil war or what kind of war? Uh, the definition of the civil war, in my opinion, is a war between the people of the same country, the same race, probably eating the same kind of food. And in this case, I think it's a civil war. But, this is a big but, with the massive U.S. military commitment and with the renewed Chinese statement of policy, I don't know if you read Marshall Lindbergh's long article on the 3rd of September in the New York Times, very important. Because now it seems to me that the Chinese believe in the theory that the developed country are the city of the world and the undeveloped country are the countryside of the world, and therefore they are going to, in my opinion, monopolize the revolution of the countryside against the city, and therefore hope to strengthen the city to death. I don't have enough time to discuss this theory because it's very interesting. But because of that, I do believe now, and this is very unfortunate for the Vietnamese people, that in the last few months it become not a question of war between the Vietnamese, but a confrontation between this Chinese theory of war and peace and the U.S. answer to that kind of theory. So I don't know who is going to win, but the answer is today that we have 400 sorties of U.S. planes in North Vietnam, 300 in South Vietnam, and tanks. And so this is, again, you see, the picture has changed. I think just you take another day, in 1961, and the period I know very well, that the Viet Cong was, although has some direction from North Vietnam, which is Norman, because what you expect otherwise, because a North Vietnamese to handle South Vietnamese to me is obvious thing. So in 1961, for example, 90% of the people who was against the Vietnamese government in the South are basically the Vietnamese peasants. He made tremendous mistake at that time, you see, and by the time when he started what he called the strategic hamlet with the forced policy of the President Botha, you see, to force the Vietnamese into strategic hamlet. And then when the coup d'etat took place and all the strategic hamlet with the hundreds of thousands of guns became the property of the Viet Cong. And then I think by that time the problem would have been very different. So I think it's very sad for me to say that the problem is not even relevant now. I think for the Vietnamese to say it, you know how painful it is. But again, we have to discuss on the basic of some realities. And yes. So, may I sum up your question like this? Is there a coalition government with the dominating Viet Cong elements would be bad for Vietnam or good for Vietnam? I think my answer is this. It depends on exactly how the war is over, in what condition. It means the condition of the settlement of the war. Nationally, I think that obviously the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese will have a say in any kind of negotiation in Vietnam, and therefore the participation of the Viet Cong in a future government in Vietnam is something we have to accept. Therefore, we have to ask ourselves, who are the Viet Cong? This is a very important question. I think Is any people who object or what? I just see some. You want me to finish list, or you object by when I say that who is a Viet Cong? I did not say that any one of you could be a Viet Cong, because it's very hard, you see, to be a Viet Cong anyway. So the Viet Cong is list. Let's start from the beginning, say in 1956. In 1956, there was a political party in North Vietnam called the Front of the Fatherland. And that party, in my opinion, was very good in a way that they stand very surely and very definitely and very clearly for the unification of Vietnam. And because of that, I think the Front of Liberation for the South, which inherit this kind of political atmosphere in 1960 when it was formed, inherit a very good political climate. It means that everyone who opposed President Diem Gorman at that time have no other choice but to run the Front of Liberation for the South. That's why you have many elements there. But when the Front of Liberation of the South was formed in December 1960, there was formed in January 1961 another party called the People's Revolutionary Party. This is, there's nothing for us to be frantic about that, but it's a norm in any political organization. I should say that I don't know if the comparison is relevant, but the People's Revolutionary Party is to the Front of Liberation like ADA to the Democratic Party or something like that. You object to that? All right. So, but roughly it's a nucleus of the people who are definitely on the Marxist side or say communist side. And these are the people, you respect them or you disagree with, this is no problem, because the presidium of the People's Revolutionary Party are the people who has been all the time in Vietnam, in the Vietnamese War from 1940 until today. But nevertheless, I do believe if we have a good climate for peace in Vietnam, it means that by the time we have peace, there is some sort of social structure in Vietnam could give the Vietnamese a sense of identification of his nation and his country. And then I don't believe that the Viet Cong could really be a very dangerous element. I don't believe so, because if I believe so, and there's no more hope for me in the Vietnamese political future, and probably it's because of that reason, I think we can actually compete with the Viet Cong. Here again, you see, you have to look at the way you see the Viet Cong or the North Vietnamese or that matter China and Russia look at the problem of this country. You might not notice that, but every communist state call their country, their organization, the People's Republic or something. It means they do believe, although they sometimes disregard some basic things among the people, they do believe that the people have a very strong influence in the decision of foreign policy, especially in the country like the United States. But I don't think that they base all this kind of judgment to delay the negotiation. I should not say because you demonstrate and then the Viet Cong delay the negotiation. I don't believe that is so simple like that. The Viet Cong refused to negotiate for many, many reasons. One is that they do believe that they are going to win. And today, even this morning, you look at the Los Angeles Times, there's a statement by the commander of U.S. Marine. He said the same thing. He said, we may win military, but we may lose everything. So the Viet Cong really believe, and with some very good reason, I think so. If they look in the countryside and they look at the structure they have now, they may win politically. That is why they have to stand this period of military defeat in order to reach for that political victory. That is why I think it's wrong for us to be optimistic about the outcome of that we could really defeat the Viet Cong today. Military, yes. It means military in the sense of physical, not in the sense of strategy, tactics, economic development, and all other things. I don't. This is the problem of. I think your question is how free is North Vietnam in relation with China, or yes. I should say this. I was impressed by the policy of North Vietnam since we bombed North Vietnam, and I'm impressed by on the technical level how they conduct their foreign policy. As you know, the first North Vietnamese mission to ask for help when we start bombing was the one who went to Moscow first. Very important. And then two and a half months later, the Prime Minister of North Vietnam, Mr. Tran Van Dihn, went to Jakarta to see Chu Enlai, the Prime Minister of the People's Republic of China. So you see, it means, according to this analysis and based on other facts, that the North Vietnamese is trying to maneuver between Soviet Russia and China in order to maintain their independence as a Vietnamese state first, because this is something which become more or less obsession of the Vietnamese people when it comes to the relation with China. It doesn't mean that when you are born a Vietnamese you have to be anti-Chinese. No, that is not true. But because of the geopolitical factors in Vietnam, every government whose captain happen to be in North Vietnam or in Hanoi has to be very careful in their relation with China. And therefore I must say that North Vietnam, although because of the war may become more and more dependent of China for economic reason and supply reason, try very hard to maintain this kind of independence, without which the attraction of a man like Ho Chi Minh and North Vietnam will become less and less in South Vietnam. So this is, and I do admit that so far they have carried a very realistic and at the same time very clever foreign policy. Actually it's better than in the South, I guess. Yes. The question is what will be the outcome of the election in Vietnam. You said today. Today means in the next 3 years or next 4 years or next week. Today? The U.S. soldier, of course, cannot vote in Vietnam. That's obvious. I'm there to object to that because they don't vote for me anyway. So when it comes to the problem of elections, I ask you a fundamental question. What is the meaning of elections? If election is just to provide a form so we could say, here we are in a democracy, and then to me it's almost, in my opinion, meaningless. But if we mean election by the consent of the government, and then election is something very important. Therefore, I do believe now, in the recent months in Vietnam, and you know I'm still persona non grata more or less with the South Vietnamese government, but nevertheless, in recent months, in May, there was several municipal elections in Vietnam, and very free. That I have to admit. It's difficult now in Vietnam to control the people anymore. You see, if you control the Catholic, the Buddhists in revolt. If you control the Catholic and the Buddhists, the students in revolt. So practically, because of that very strange balance in Vietnamese politics today, the last election on some municipalities was really free. But these people who are elected in the Vietnam today, for example, Dr. Tran Van Dihn in Saigon, is totally anti-Vietnamese government. And to a certain extent, he was not really pro-American. So based on this, I believe that given a certain reasonable amount of time, the election will probably bring the Viet Cong in, but not to a point when he said that the country will be taken over by the Viet Cong. This is really my belief based on the May elections in Vietnam. And, but I don't think that today means tomorrow or something like that, but say 2-3 years after the peace treaty, actually according to the Geneva Agreement, you have election only after 2 years. You are not satisfied yet with that answer. So. Yes. Yes, Laos also. Yes, this is why when you say it, you justified actually the role of the U.S. military in Vietnam, exactly because of the problem of security. And I think it's not good as an argument, because if you say it, and then I think the Vietnamese military government said that when we cannot have election because there's no security, there's a Viet Cong everywhere. I think that argument is not good enough. I think the problem now is to have a rational, I should not use that word pacification, but reintegration of the Vietnamese community. For example, if a province in Vietnam is secure, and we have to define what we mean by security in that sense, and then we have elections, provincial, and there is some provincial election already, and then gradually we make it a national election. You see, my point is this. I have no objection at all if the people in Vietnam vote for the Viet Cong or for anybody, I think. But I'm interested in finding the ways for the Vietnamese people not to vote because they have no choice. I think if we believe in liberalism, that is what really we have to believe. It's too easy now for me to come here and say that when if we have a vote, the Viet Cong will take over. I should have tremendous ovation, I guess. But I would be very unfair to the Vietnamese peasant. How do I know? Frankly, I don't know. I think how the people outside the Vietnamese village know exactly to what political party the peasant in Vietnam belong today. I do not say that the Vietnamese government has been very good to them. Actually, I have been so bad that I was very surprised that there are still some people who are not Viet Cong in Vietnam after 1963, frankly. It shows to me that in Vietnam we have really a tragic situation when the Vietnamese people, the peasant, not people like me, have very little choice in the last few years. So maybe after few tries we could not convince them. It's all right, but why don't we try? That's why I believe that with 100,000 American students in Vietnam, maybe we can show them what democracy looks like. You mean that do I want to justify the presence of the United States in Vietnam? As you know, I have described to you the historical process of the American commitment in Vietnam. The American commitment in Vietnam has been done through a series of very strange things. It means that we have to react to certain situations, and therefore we have to react more and more. So the problem today, in my opinion, suppose now my answer is that it's not justified. What could you and me do? In the case of Vietnam, for example, what could we do? That is why I talk about the treaty, because that's to me the most reasonable way to answer this problem. Yes, because I think it's too late now to discuss even why because they are there. Yes. Yes. Not necessary, yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Your very long question means this, that is the Catholic anti-national. It means that when you are Vietnamese and you are Catholic, it means you are excluded to the Vietnamese community. First, I'm a Buddhist, but I must say that is a wrong assessment of the situation in Vietnam. I have never seen anyone who is more anti-French than the Catholic president we have in Vietnam, President Diem. He was even too anti-French, for example, and the French put him in jail once. So I think that to say that the Catholic in Vietnam did not bring any contribution to the welfare of the Vietnamese people is to create a very dangerous situation. It means that we have to exclude 2 million from the community of 14 million. It means that we have to practice what may I call Nazism. So in that case, I think the only alternative for us is to bring that community into our community. And then this is my answer to your question. Why there's a conflict between the Buddhists and the Catholic? If you look very deeply at the problem, it's not a religious conflict, because nobody objected in Vietnam in 1954, 55, 56, until 60 to President Diem being a Catholic, because of one another reason. Many Vietnamese, when we are not Catholic, as regarded as Buddhists, but we are basically Confucianists. Let's never forget that the Vietnamese is first a Confucianist and second a Buddhist or a Catholic. So on that basis, we have some sort of a moral reconciliation. I don't think that you could actually take a Catholic as a traitor. You know that the man who is now very busy, and you may meet him if you go to some negotiation in the future with the Hanoi, is Dr. Nguyen Minh Ha, who is not only a Catholic, but is married to a French lady. So, and he is a very important man in the North Vietnamese government. So I think there's a lot we could do in order to bring that community. But to say that a Catholic in Vietnam is a traitor to the Vietnamese nation, is, or to be anti-national, is what you mean? Oh no, I don't think so. You see, this is again, you see, how the Catholic could be the hope when the Pope make that address at the UN. Well, I cannot go against the Pope anyway, so. Yes. 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 Yes, very correct. Yes. It's a part of the Washington Post. Yeah. Your question remains like this. The Tran Van Dihn, the Prime Minister of South Vietnam, rice policy, it means our cost of living policy, what he's dealing with this problem. When you read the recent very outrageously optimistic cover of the Time magazine, even Time magazine has to admit that there's two problems the government could not solve yet. The inflation, it means the cost of living, and the refugees. So Tran Van Dihn, when he came into power, he wanted to carry a drastic measure, it means to shoot all the people who refuse to cooperate with him in bringing the price down. He didn't shoot any, because when he shoots someone, he might happen to see that the one he has to shoot probably his wife's brother. So you see, this is, even if he succeeds to do that, it's very difficult to shoot the people in order to solve the economic problem. The problem, as I see, is that during this monsoon offensive, the Vietcong has failed in a military target, but has really succeeded in an economic target. It means that the rice in Vietnam, which is grown in the countryside, could not get into the city. The rice in many areas could not get into the city, and also charcoal and all this commodity. So again, in order to solve this economic problem, now the South Vietnamese government has a temporary policy, is to import rice from the United States. That is the best way to do things under last circumstances, but it's not going to solve any problem. The problem again is how now to bring back the security to the Delta. And you know recently how expensive we could do that. For example, in the Barton in around Quy Nhon, which is an area which produces a lot of rice in Vietnam, we have to spend about 2 regiments to protect the people to harvest their rice. It means that this is probably the most difficult problem we face now in Vietnam, regardless of other problems. The problem of economic deterioration and the problem of refugee, and they are connected. Because of the economic depression in the countryside, the people has to go to the cities and create a tremendous problem now. We have now about 650,000 refugees in the city. It means that we bring more poverty and more hunger and more dissatisfaction in the city. This is going to create a tremendous social problem. I think probably to a point when I suspect that unless we have a very good solution, maybe it will be the end of the General Key's government. If he could not solve this problem in the next, for example, 6 months, because I read even a controlled press in Vietnam, all the newspaper are asking for an economic policy. So I think the U.S. government, I think there are some people whom I know who has proposed this solution, and then if you are interested in the problem of Vietnam, it may be a subject for further thinking. A proposal, something like a new deal for Vietnam, for the South Vietnamese. Now you see you have a Cam Ranh base, which is fantastic base, you see nation base, and now it's been developed into one of the, probably in the future, the biggest base in the Far East. So out of this complex of industry created, strength enough by the military presence of the United States in Vietnam, we could actually create a new economic deal for the Vietnamese people, electrification of the village and all sorts of things, like a massive economic plan out of this economic complex created by the U.S. presence in Vietnam, like in Cam Ranh or Da Nang. I think there are some people who have been thinking in that direction. I don't know how it could be done, but I think that the problem is serious, and we cannot deal with this problem now with the important rise from the United States or the shooting smuggler or just a very simple solution. We have to do it with a very imaginative solution. One of us is what we call the New Deal for the Vietnamese. I think since 1962, when the time when we have a treaty with Laos, I think that the role of the Russian in the South Vietnam, or in the situation in Vietnam, in the Southeast Asia, has been much less important. For example, now what should the Russian do in North Vietnam? Just few hand, aid, missile, but very little, because the Russians are in a very difficult situation. So I think and this is again, this makes the problem in Vietnam today much more complex than the problem of Vietnam when we have the Geneva Agreement in 1954, because at that time the role of Russia in the world, and especially in the Far East, is really very strong. But now I think that the role of the Russian is not as strong as many people expected. And in the economic field, there's some competition, and I think the North Vietnamese prefer Russian aid than the Chinese aid because it's more in machinery and more in industrialization. For the political competition, there was, for example, in the structure of North Vietnam, two wings. One is we may call pro-Russian, and the other is pro-Chinese. And it seems to me, and I disagree with many others, it seems to me that the pro-Chinese wing is getting stronger than the pro-Russian. For example, I have heard some news, and which I may confirm and maybe not, that the man in North Vietnam who is in charge now of the problem of South Vietnam is General Nguyen Chi Thanh, and I have known him personally during younger years, and I think he's definitely the Chinese prototype. He was trained in Yan'an, and his outlook, even when he fought against the French, is very much, I must say, the cave outlook. He refused to believe any argument which does not fit, you see, into the Chinese concept of war of liberation. And according to some news which I got from Washington, I cannot vouch for it, but he's now in charge of all the coordination of the problem in South Vietnam. It means to me that if really it's true, and then I think the Chinese win in the North Vietnamese government really has become stronger. But it does not mean, again, I cannot see in a very near future that North Vietnam automatically go to the Chinese side. Not yet. I don't see any evidence of that yet. Oh yes, I think you see the South Vietnam has been very fortunate in one field, that we do not have to fear the problem of starvation, that always have enough rice for people, and the climate is better than in the north. So I think South Vietnam, given a certain amount of security and economic development, really could develop very rapidly and more than and have less problem in economic development like in India or Indonesia or other country. So I think that the prospect for economic development in Vietnam is indeed bright, because the economic the rice, because of the situation now, is scarce, but normally we export rice, and I think there's no worry that South Vietnam, if left to develop, has more chance than even North Vietnam. Yes, you mean the rubber? Yes. Again, you see, because of the insecurity problem, now 2 or 3 rubber plantations has been closed by the French, because many rubber plantations are still owned by the French. But after the war, I think all this may be used, and I think South Vietnam basically has more resource. That's what I'm planning to do if I become Prime Minister in Vietnam. Last time with you, no doubt about that. We have to do something for that. Actually,
we have time for one more question.
In terms of your plan of like 100,000 Americans,
yes.
isn't there a danger that you have a cultural heritage which might be threatened by such a cultural invasion, might then become very fine?
Yes. The question is that if you have 100,000 American students in Vietnam, this is going to threaten our culture. We have been associated with foreigners for many, many years, and I can assure you it's very difficult to threaten the strange Vietnamese culture. The Chinese did not threaten it for many 100 years. The French did not really threaten it in our culture field, and I think, personally, I have been in the United States for off and on for 3 years, and I know a lot of American. I have a lot of credit cards and all this kind of things. But I don't think that American culture, I don't know how you define American culture to begin with. But if you define it by the affluency and things like that, and then I don't think that personally I'm not afraid of the American cultural threat, frankly. Actually, but that is very superficial. I don't believe that the Japanese are Americanized. That is something you see only on the surface. And I don't really think. On the contrary, because of the supposedly threat at American culture. Maybe we develop our own culture more intensely. That is another reaction. Actually, the period in Vietnam when we had the finest literature was during the Chinese domination. Because then you have to develop intensely your own abilities in order to repulse that foreign invasion in culture. For example, in 1930s, we have the best novels in Vietnam written by the people who are educated in the French university and college, and they are the best novel in Vietnamese we have today. So I think this, even the French culture, which I think is one of the very nice one and very attractive one, did not really threaten the structure of the Vietnamese culture as I know it. Of course, I'm dressed now like an American, more or less, but it doesn't mean that I'm really American public in any ways. That's only the surface. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Mr. Tran Van Dihn, on behalf of the Associated Students at UCLA, I would like to take this opportunity to thank you for speaking on our program.
And thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.